So first of all, I would like to bring the ancestors into the room, and they'll also ask permission for the ancestors for me to speak today. So seeds tell the story of hidden discoveries, of time holds them to be discovered. When I was growing up, I had no idea that I would become a farmer, that I would find pride and satisfaction in the work that I do. Lord knows that work is hard. Sometimes my bones be aching, my back be breaking. But when I look across the field and I see the earth and I see the sky and the mountains, I'm reminded on whose shoulders I stand on and the sacrifices that they made for me to be here with you today. You see, growing food and hearing stories behind seeds was all new to this city girl. But I learned through asking questions, inquiry. I'm no expert. Mother Earth takes that title. I'm just a passing through, sharing my story, planting the seed for the next generation of farmers who will look like me. I hope this conference has been a way to connect us all through sovereignty, cuisine, culture, stewardship, and food. Many people are now rediscovering their history through seeds. Even here in America and throughout the world, people are starting to claim it. In this discovery, we will follow the trail laid down by our ancestors as sovereign keepers. It's time for people to come out of the shadow, come out from the darkness and into the light, to celebrate their value and true meaning. For it is the seed that holds the key to unlocking the secrets of forgotten times and story. From European to Africans, seeds not only store energy for survival, but store the history of people. As an African American, I grew up not knowing the history or the story of my people. Intentionally erased were the intellectual wisdom and knowledge of my ancestors as they fought to survive in an unknown and unfamiliar land. I could only imagine their thought processing, thinking about what is it that I could bring? What is it I could hide? What is it that I could bring that would not be confiscated? It was seeds. Seeds that gave a new life as they traveled afar, a long journey from a home that was familiar to a place unfamiliar to their native soil. But as seeds do, always finding a place to survive and live again. History from our ancestors told, grandma, grandpa, abuela, abuelo, would tell us that seeds were placed in areas hidden from sun in darkness, that they were meticulously braided into our hair, a hair that is coarse and thick, a good hiding place, a hair that protects the element from the rain, from the heat, and eventually the snow. Yet it will be these seeds sown on this unfamiliar land that would grow food as sustenance and eventually feed a nation. But that road would be hard and arduous. You see, seeds are the foundation of life. Our ancestors planted seeds not only to eat, but to celebrate life. There was drumming, singing, dancing. They were used for currency to display wealth, as well as adornments to accentuate our beauty. During the colonial era, the process of discarding indigenous crops gained further momentum as officials shifted on familiar crops, such as sugarcane and chocolate, coffee and cotton, and less on subsistence crops, which they neglected. My ancestral lineage flows through Africa. In fact, human race DNA can be traced back to Africa. In his book, The Columbia Exchange, author Alfred Crosby offers insight of what was happening during the period of Christopher Columbus' exploration, but more importantly, what happened post-Columbus era. During early voyages, transportation of goods, plants, and animals happened between the Old World, which was commonly Europe and Asia, the Americans, and West Africa. Since they didn't have ships big enough to cross the Atlantic Ocean, trade only occurred between these continents. Only when the introduction of ships big enough to cross the Atlantic Ocean, hence the beginning of the transatlantic trade, which now included the New World and their new cargo, people. Yet throughout this time period, little or no mention was made of the vast ecosystem that was happening. So in his book in 1972, Crosby opened up the world to the significance of travel and the impact on the biological and cultural landscape of the world. Still, when it came to the history of Africa, African botany, scientific nomenclature, genius of plants, species, that knowledge was either ignored or pretended to be discovered by Europeans. Even prior to Columbus' explorations, Africa, because of its tropical climate, was the main source of the world's food supply. Yet history always portrays Africa as this dark continent, a continent in scarcity, needing the help of Europeans' intervention. Once upon their arrival to the New World, seeds became a mixture of Afro, Euro, and indigenous cornucopia of different food ways of culture. Food made its way from the Old World to the New World and vice versa. To think that African culture is monolithic is to say that Africans are alike, when in fact, slaves came from all parts of Africa, different regions, tribes, different languages. So their methods of growing food and cooking food were different. Plants from seeds sown within different ethnicities had messages hidden inside on what they would become on non-native soil. Africans' contribution to the global food supply can be seen in such staples such as cereals, root crops, herbs, fruits, and vegetables. Common crops like millet, sorghum, black-eyed peas and cowpeas and pigeon peas, watermelon, okra, rice, kola nut, coffee found their way into American cuisine. Does anyone know what this is? For you cola drinkers, this is the kola nut. Did you know that the common soda drink, Coca-Cola, is made from a derivative of the kola nut? It found its way from Africa to the New World. The kola nut was also used as a disinfectant against stagnant water, which was common on slave ships. It is also high in caffeine. The high caffeine content is higher than coffee. Many Africans were healers. They brought their knowledge to the New World. Medicinal herbs such as tamarind, bitter melon, pepper, and castor bean plants help enslaved people to survive, ward off illnesses, hunger, and protected their culture. How many of you are old enough to experience back in the day taking a spoonful of castor oil as a laxative? That taste was bitter. And sometimes your parents would give you some lemon to suck on to take away that taste. But that oil was also used in terms of ailments, arthritis, even head lice. However, that oil in its purest form is poisonous and is mainly used to fuel lamps. Because Europeans didn't know the name of African seeds, they would use the word guinea. And so you would see guinea pepper, guinea squash, guinea sorghum, guinea grass, guinea yam, even guinea fowl. Once in the New World, the slave owners would classify their food as slave food, as their food was kept separate in what they ate and what they grew. Many even thought that these plants, because they were unfamiliar to European and the slave owners, that they were weeds. However, slaves would experiment and incorporate different plants from their surroundings for dietary, medicinal, and religious purposes. Working alongside indigenous people, they would learn new techniques of planting. However, as plantain owners watched the slaves work, they saw their methods, their knowledge, their use of tools, their culinary skills. They took this knowledge and made it their own. Because ownership of a slave was property. And so how can property claim anything, own anything? Yet, over time, many of the food and culinary dishes would eventually make its way onto the menus of some of the finest restaurants and kitchens, such as jambalaya, hoppin' john, grits, gumbo, just to name a few. One of the pivotal seeds that the enslaved Africans brought with them and would define a nation and bring it wealth was rice. Glaberina, Oryza glaberina. The two domesticated varieties were sativa and glaberina. In Africa, it was the women who did the farming. But in this new world, it would be both men and women. The colonial South they were looking for a new commodity that they could export to bring them wealth, to bring the wealth to the plantation owners. These owners were unaware of how rice was grown, but enslaved Africans knew, because the climate of the low South was similar to the climate back home. That swampy terrain was perfect medium to grow rice. Seeing how Africans were able to use that swampy climate of the low country was a novelty to the plantation owners. As they would harvest the plant, then they would mill it using a pestle and mortar to remove that hard outer husk. Then proceed with winnowing in a basket, using the wind to remove the chaff and debris, and leaving the end product of a grain of rice. Only when the plantation owners saw how African slaves could grow, harvest, remove its outer shell, making it more pliable, edible, and white, that this seed, along with the input of millions of people, will become the South's #1 commodity. Hence, the beginning of the transatlantic slave of millions of African people entering the low country borders of the South. Today, the tradition continues as West African culture, along with rice cultivation, is still being practiced by the Gullah people of the Carolinas and Georgia. And the name Gullah is presumed to come from Gola, part of Africa, West Africa. So hearing my story made me see why seeds are so important. They tell a story of people, their history, their culture. Seeds are fundamental to our life, yet they're being threatened. It is estimated that between 90 to 95% of seed diversity has been lost forever. Folks, that means extinct, never to come back. Just think what is happening with the coronavirus, and if something like that happened to our seed supply, we will be in danger. Right now, when it comes to food security, out of 12,000 seeds, only 150 are cultivated for food consumption. Yet the impact of our genetic diversity has been lost and compromised by those who are doing monocropping based on yield production, the use of chemicals, which are impacting our environment, water supply, and bee population, as well as climate change and genetic modification. The industrialization of our food system has played a major role in disrupting a food system that's not protecting seeds, rather has offered the opportunities for companies to patent them. Companies like DuPont, BASF, Kim China, Cativa have turned the seed industry into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Yet it behooves us to think that we have 7.8 billion people on this planet, but we have allowed a handful of people and companies to control our food system. I remember growing up as a child that Bayer did aspirins. Who knew that they will become a multi-billion-dollar industry, gobbling up Monsanto, and in the process having to give away their food company to BASF. No longer is the farmer making the decisions on how to plant and how to harvest and how to breed plants and how to save seeds. Even though it was the farmer who planted that seed, harvested that seed, nurtured that seed. Many times farmers are now in the process of asking permission to use seeds and use their chemical to produce higher yields. I remember headline being put out by Monsanto suing farmers because of the fact that they claimed they were replanting their seeds, and because of patent, they own those seeds because of intellectual property. Folks, how did this happen? During the 1930s, the Plant Patent Act was discovered. It granted protection to new cultivars of asexual plants. However, it did not involve food crops. However, in 1970, things changed as the Plant Variety Protection Act now included the rights of food crops. This was supposed to last for 25 years, but the Supreme Court in 1980 ruled that it was a legal right for companies to patent an organism. Wait a second, because before that decision, it was believed by all that all living organisms belong to nature, not to human beings. So now you have a handful of companies supplying seeds for culture. Sorry, not for culture and not for diversity, but for high yields. Flooding the market with hybrid seeds, seeds that you know we can't save. Even convincing farmers that now is the right thing to do, to buy seeds from them and chemical fertilizers and bringing them into a system that's static, without diversity, without culture, and then allowing them to buy these seeds year after year, stating that they wanted to relieve the burden of saving seeds. So now we have big companies now relying on uniformity, not on creativity, not on diversity, not on culture, diminishing fewer breeds and varieties. Folks, it's not just about the seeds. It's about our biodiversity that's being lost, causing a huge impact on our ecosystem. Around 75% of the global food crops rely on the intervention of animals, insects, to pollinate them. Such catastrophe could jeopardize our food supply. We must think about ecosystem in terms of the integration of plants and animals, seeds, water, and soil. They all play a part in our health and the well-being of this planet. Now, folks, for some encouraging news. All is not lost. We have gardeners and farmers and seed libraries and activists coming together to give seeds a new life, a new meaning, encouraging growers and farmers to grow heirloom seeds and to save seeds. But the most important thing is not to own seeds. We should not be in the process of thinking about ownership of anything. Ownership of land, ownership of people, ownership of animals, and ownership of seeds. Bringing back the knowledge of seed saving to a whole new generation of growers to celebrate life, our culture, and knowledge. Saving seeds now has become a political act of power, a grassroots movement. Along with the access of land, people are starting to reconnect to the earth, realizing one could preserve the best traits of a particular plant without diminishing their value. So, folks, why should we be saving seeds? Why is it important? Well, it's about preservation, protecting the life cycle of plants. It's about performance, creating traits that are strong and viable. It's about history. It's about for us to learn our history, our connection to seeds and crops and plants. It's legacy. It's tradition. It's providing truth and answers for so much of our history being co-opted by others. It's being able to fight the industrial complex of big ag who feel that it's their God-given right to patent seeds. Because if we allow them to patent seeds, which are part of our DNA, what's next as a people? It's important because it reduces costs, because you don't have to buy seeds from big ag companies when you can save them yourself. And of course, help pollinators and adaptability. And what does that mean? A friend of mine told me one time, Karen, each year try to save that collard green seed because time after time, the soil would adjust to it and it would bring on the best traits of that crop. And again, education. Right now, I would love everybody to be farmers, but I think we are reaching a point where we need to integrate culture with technology. And we need also for Black and Brown people to be part of STEM, of science, of technology, engineering, so that they can bring and coexist indigenous qualities with technology, which is really, really important. And so for me, as a farmer, I had to bring my whole family into understanding where their food came from. In this picture is me sowing seeds, but also it's my children and my grandchildren, because they never knew their legacy, their ancestral legacy when it came to farming. Again, the notion was always around slavery, but to open the doors and let them understand the reason why we were brought here, the seeds in our hair, seeds hidden from sun and light, so they couldn't be confiscated. is because we were brought here because of our knowledge of agriculture. The tools that are being used today were brought here by African sisters and brothers. The methods of agriculture, irrigation, all were brought by my African ancestors. And so here I am with my family, getting them involved to understand where seeds come from, but also they're here at the farm picking out collard greens. Because again, collard greens has been a staple of the African community of stories told. So it's important to really talk about the next generation, the people who are going to come after me, to make sure that they understand that what they are seeding, what they are putting in the ground means something. And for them to have the experience to feel the soil. This is farm school, a group of farm school students, New York School of Urban Agriculture, which is farm school, and getting people on our farm. This is our farm. We have 3 acres of land up in Chester, New York. It's in the black dirt region of Chester, of Orange County in Chester, New York. Look at that soil, folks. 40% organic matter. And so even though we grow the best vegetables, as you can see, we also grow the best weeds. But again, it's getting people to put their hands in the soil to understand that connection. It's not just about putting that seed in the ground and covering it up, but to really honor that place of belonging. The Lenape people of this region, to make sure that people honor these indigenous ancestors. And so having them put their hands in the soil and sometimes even taking their shoes off, take your shoes off so that you can feel the soil beneath you. And then at the end of the day, sit back and pay homage to those that were there before us. Several years ago, I was able to visit a family who really embodied seed saving. And this was the entrance to their door because they understood the importance of culture, of legacy, of tradition. And I'm glad to say that through my journey and through my travels, I've met people who are doing the work, like Owen Taylor at True Love Seed, Ken Green, Hudson Valley Seed in Ira Wallace at Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. These and others are doing the work of teaching people the importance of saving seeds, but also that connection to culture and tradition, which is so, so important. And again, I could not go without talking about my farming partners at Rise and Root Farm, Michaela Hayes, Jane Hodge, and Lori Clevenger. We've been growing on this land now, going into our 6th year. And it's been hard. 4 women, 2 of us are women of color, 3 of us are LGBTQ women, but our focus is on food and social justice and legacy. And so with the help of Owen Taylor, when he asked us, can you grow a seed for us that we can save and pass on to others? We did cuca melon or mouse melon, which came from Mexico. It tastes like a cucumber melon sort of taste. It's small. You can pop it in your mouth, but when you bite into it, this sort of refreshing taste. It's not a bitter taste. It's not a sour taste. I would say it's a refreshing taste. And so now we're part of the seed family at True Love Seed with our cucamelon seed. And last, folks, I want to leave you with this quote from Maya Angelou. We cannot change the past, but we can change our attitude towards it. Uproot guilt and plant forgiveness. Tear out arrogance and seed humility. Exchange love for hate, thereby making the present comfortable and the future promising. Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to tell my story and why seed saving is so important. Back to you, Jim.
Wonderful. Hallelujah. Amen, sister. What a sermon. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Now, after the sermon, um, there might be a song. So, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Now, these little seeds of ours, we've got to make them part of our bloodline. So, here's a question, Mama Karen. And thank you so much. And I'm borrowing from one of the questions that Rowan White left us about this idea of seed saving, seed sovereignty, indigenous culture and wisdom, technology, and so forth. I'm going to reference, you mentioned this Columbian exchange. And we know that Columbus came over here and he was so cruel, he was so violent. He killed so many folks who were indigenous in the Caribbean. King Ferdinand and Isabella had him arrested and had him pretty much banned from Europe because he was so violent. But our country adopted, embraced him, and named our capital after him. So many universities, so many cities. So his presence was an onslaught and devastation to many things, including, I would say, this sense of seeds. Now, we know within indigenous culture, oftentimes they refer to corn and wild rice as their grandmother. They talk about three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. So I'm asking Mama Karen, how do we take that narrative of so many lies that Columbus led us into that also told us that seeds are to be commodified? Seeds are things you simply buy in a store and you plant and then you patent. So, how do we use our work? How do we continue our work? And what kind of rituals and references and books that can help the people who are listening in to this spiritual service begin to formulate a great remembering of these spiritual connections that we have with seeds, these family connections with seeds, please.
Jim, that is such a good question because, again, we're in an element now where people don't even know what the truth is. There's been so many lies that have been brought right before us. It's the 21st century, right here and now. And so, what I try to tell young people that if you are lucky to have grandparents and great grandparents or great uncles or great aunts, I tell young people take out those daggone Samsung Galaxies and iPhones and sit down and say, talk to me about our history. Because tell us about when it was when we didn't get our food from the store, that we got our food off of a farm, that we didn't rely on a company to buy seeds, and sit down and capture those essence, Jim. And I say that because what I'm afraid of is 10 years from now, when things start to change, people will tell us, your family never farmed, you never saved seeds. And so this is the time now to capture those stories, not about seeds, but also about seeds and your legacy and your relationship to land. For so long, people have told us to get away from the land, that farming is slave work, when in fact, in order to produce food is part of our life and our livelihood. And to also understand how seeds were brought here the African experience of seeds being brought here, and that the cuisines that you see in modern day kitchens and restaurants come from indigenous people, and it should be celebrated. And I say that because when I was giving that talk, if you have to understand that seeds are the genetic DNA of a plant, and if we allow a handful of companies within a population of 7.8 billion people control our seed industry, what is going to happen down the line when it comes to humans and animals? And so now's the time to get involved in seed saving campaigns, groups, library. I was able to read into, of course, Farming While Black, a book to get into and read.
Yes.
Another book was Black Rice by Judith Carney to read. Peter Wood does a book on the Black majority. So there's a lot of information out there, but the most critical information is within your own family tie. Capture those stories so they don't disappear. Excellent question.
Yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. You know, I have an essay in a new book coming out in April, and the book is entitled "We Are Each Other's Harvest." It's a book edited and compiled by this bad young sister out in Oakland named Natalie Bazile, whose first book was called Queen Sugar, that Oprah and Ava DuVernay bought the rights to it and became a TV series. But my article is called "We Are the Seeds of Our Ancestors' Dreams." So, as you were saying, that we must realize that we are also planting seeds in whatever we do, and that we are already invoking in this session, to all those who are listening, we are invoking the spirits of those yet to be born. What we say, our vibrations impact generations to come. Now, one of the questions that someone has asked is about the cooperative movement and things of that nature. And so can you, I know, let me mention real quickly here that, and you mentioned Leo Penniman's book, Farming While Black. The question was about the cooperative movement. I wanted to mention, of course, Collective Courage by Jessica Nemhart.
Right.
But recognize that way back in 1903, Du Bois wrote a book about Black cooperatives. And we know that many of the civil rights leaders, John Lewis, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, before they began to work in civil rights, they were part of these Black farmer cooperatives, okay, in the South. So we have a long connection with cooperatives. But speak more, if you would, Mama Karen.
No, well, that's the truth. You know what I'm saying? It goes back. This is nothing new. This is how we as Black people survive. We survived by coming together. You know, we had to rely on each other because who else was going to rely on us? We could not get anything, no help from the federal government. The USDA, forget about them. Laws that were set, Jim Crow laws, Black Code, all of these laws prevented Black farmers to even have an edge. We were losing land by the thousand. And it was Black folks coming together and saying, you know what? We're stronger together than being alone, one farm alone. And so the cooperative movement till this day continues to embody the Black experience, Black pride, and Black strength of coming together. And so the history of Black cooperatives goes way, way back, especially at a time when white folks were stealing our land, stealing our enterprises. And the only way that we could be self-sufficient and self-reliant was to invoke on cooperatives. Great question.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I've given over the years numerous talks about cooperatives. I helped found here in Kentucky a natural foods cooperative back in '72. And we've been working a lot around the nation, actually, in borrowing from the Madrigan co-op model of co-ops being more what's called worker-owned. But in my talks, I've also mentioned that we have this long legacy of co-ops within Turtle Island. If you go back to what was called the Iroquois Federation, the Great Law of Peace that inspired our country's three branches of government that we have now was a borrow from that cooperative within the Iroquois Federation, the Underground Railroad. Okay,
Right.
and we channel, our dear sister, Harriet Tubman,
That's
uh,
right.
who was working along a whole series of cooperative churches and people and farms and whatever to get folks from point A in the South enslavement to up north. So the point is that we have a long legacy of having cooperatives in our country, and we need to tap into that kind of a wisdom and have cooperative enterprises in every business sector. We have a strong tradition, say, in farming and food. Again, if you look at what's going on, say, in Spain with the Madrigans, they have co-ops in every business sector. So they're important enterprises. Now, I want to touch back. We we have so much to say, but in channeling, okay, like you, dear sisters, okay, this is in no way saying us men folk ain't got some important work to do. But we do know that you mentioned Aaliyah Penniman's Farming While Black. We mentioned Collective Courage. We talked about Monica White, Freedom Farmer,
Freedom for farmers.
Owen's Color Food.
Who,
You see all these Black women who are writing, who are farming, returning to the land, okay? And we men folk are too, but we understand that some 12,000 years ago, women, because men were out hunting and gone for weeks and weeks,
right.
gave the world, gave the human species we now call agriculture. And that agriculture, there's a book called When the Drummers Were Women by a friend of mine named Lane Redmond, who connects, and you mentioned winnowing. Now she connects this
Right.
winnowing device with what became like, you know, the hand drum. Okay. So you have farming and music being combined together. But just talk a bit about, if you can, Mama Karen, about the significance in this what we call 21st century of the this ascendancy, not saying women haven't played a role our entire human evolution, but the ascendancy of women's voices like Wangari Maathai, okay, in Kenya with the Green Belt movement. Talk more about that.
You know what? I think for so long, Jim, I'm glad you brought this up. So long, our voices have been silent.
Yes.
If you look at the global population when it comes to food, it's women. It's women. And yet, time and time again in the 21st century, we are still silent. We are still silent when it comes to land access to land, still silence when it comes to technology, still silence when it comes to even entering the global market. But yet, it's the woman's voice again that you're starting to hear about stories of long ago, starting to project and also to help the new Black and brown women that are going to come behind us, and making sure that people to understand that within this movement, it's not only about farming, but it's also about equity and rights that for so long has been neglected or really pushed aside when it comes to the women movement. And so I hope through agriculture, through my legacy as an elder, and so many of us legacy as an elder, that we're starting to open doors to make sure that we push forward the voices of new people that are coming to the forefront. I've got names as Francis Perez that I know, who's out there doing the work. I see other people, our dear friend, Dara Cooper,
Yes.
doing the work. Leah Pettiman doing the work. My friend Olivia Watkins out there doing the work. And so These are young women that are taking agriculture and spinning it on its wheel and not replicating the capitalism of exploitation and extraction that is happening. One thing that you really talked about in terms of not only in terms of saving seeds and saving our culture in terms of cooperative, but there's a movement now in terms of building wealth. Back in the day, we always did susus because within our community, we see how within the Black community, wealth compared to white wealth is 13 times more than Black wealth. White families' wealth totals $141,000 a year. Black family wealth, $11,000. And so not only are we talking about in terms of agriculture, but there also needs to start having to talk about economics and wealth. And so what we're starting to see now within a lot of our communities is start having those conversations about social capital and communal wealth. What does that look like? Because on one hand, it's about farming, but then how do we start building wealth within our community in terms of communal wealth and social capital and base building? And so, again, through the cooperative model, you're starting to see groups starting to bring in the cooperative model in terms of wealth building and entrepreneurship, which is really, really important.
Yes, thank you. Mama Karen, it was a couple of years ago at Slow Food Nations. We had an entire track there on cooperatives, and I think it's available on our Slow Food website. I think it might have been themed "The Radical Shift Towards Cooperatives," and just to bear in mind that humans have evolved over, we say, a few million years, and the idea of cooperating, collaborating has been a big part of our whole evolution, and that the earth operates as a network of cooperatives. The idea of a seed, this theme, is available or is possible because within the soil, there's all these networks going on, all these cooperative things going on, all this reciprocity going on within the soil, between all the minerals and the fungi and the nematodes and the worms and so forth, that makes this seed possible. So we understand that cooperation is part of the rhythm of the earth, and our work is to kind of connect back with that. We were talking earlier about the sense of spiritual connection with seeds, spiritual connection with soil, dirt, air, and water. Now, let's talk a little bit about. I know that oftentimes when you sit down and have a meal, oftentimes you say a prayer or a blessing for what you're eating. But I've been saying, and you've been saying, Mama Karen, that the entire food and ag system ought to be returned to the sense of spiritual relationship. So when we plant seeds, as we know it occurs in many farms, we know it occurs at the Soulfire farm and occurs on our farm, we say a blessing. We say a prayer. When you're harvesting, when you're trucking it and distributing it, when you're retailing it, when you're cooking it, we should invoke this sense of spirituality. Speak more about that.
Yeah, you know what? I always tell this story time and time again because it's not about religion for me, but there's definitely a spirit when you're out on the land. When you're out on the land, right, and you are surveying the land and you feel the wind blow. You feel the wind, but also you hear the wind. Is if you're the spirit, the ancestors are asking to be called in, you know. And for some of us, it's real, it's magical. I remember when I first even thought about farming. Again, folks, I just wanted to let people know that that trauma still exists. I'm not making light of the fact that trauma still exists, because even for me, when I first thought of going into farming, I suffered trauma. Those things came back to me, that I wasn't worthy, that it was slave work. And it wasn't until something inside said to me, Karen, you have to face your demons, find the truth. And for me, Jim, it was going to the land and putting my hands in the soil that I
Yeah.
felt that connection of belonging.
Yeah.
And so for me, in growing up, in church, and hearing spirituals, and hearing, the call and response from ancestors, and from loved ones, there is, within the Black experience, there's this spirituality that exists, that calls us to nurture our people, that calls us to take care of one another. And so right now, what I'm seeing is that call of nature for young Black and brown men and women, that to come back to the land. And so for me, 10 years ago, I would never believe that I would see young Black and brown people wanting to farm. I tell this story time and time, and I get emotional, because I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a speaking engagement, and this woman and her 7-year-old daughter came up to me and said, Miss Washington, I know you're in a hurry. Can you just stop to take pictures? And I said, sure. And so she said, with pride, she said, you know what my daughter said? She said, Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be a farmer. Jim, the tears, just
Yes.
the tears, because again, that spiritual connection, something that I said to that little 7-year-old girl, connected in a way that her mother felt pride and joy in saying that my daughter wants to be a farmer. And so
Yeah.
spirituality has always been the essence of who we are. Even if we were, on the farm out in the land, and we were drumming, and we were
Uh-huh.
singing, and we were dancing, we always had a method of calling into our world, our spirits, our kin, asking them, even when I began my talk, asking permission of the
Yeah.
ancestors to speak. So there's always been that spiritual connection. And one thing I want to say also is, daggone, the Black church has always been there in terms of helping Black farmers from the very, very beginning. And I want people to remember that, and be reminded of that connection that we have as Black people, not only to the land, but to the Black church. It has always been there for us.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, thank you. Absolutely. One of the questions that one of our listeners asked about was the idea of whether it's urban farming, rural farming, and how do we spread that joy, that love, that work more into different housing arrangements. And we oftentimes see things as being separate. Over here is housing, might be affordable housing. Over here is food production and whatever. I know here in Kentucky, in Lexington, I have done a lot of work with Habitat for Humanities when they have gotten people to give access to homes that they built. They bring me in to do a workshop on a backyard or a community garden. And then down in Bowling Green, Kentucky, the Habitat, along with the Housing Authority, built a housing complex of about maybe 20 homes. And we brought in some designers, and they put this community garden space right in the middle of this housing complex. We've also worked a lot with different community organizations. Maybe it's young women who are going to post-secondary that with their kids are living in a residential area. We go in there and create gardens within that particular community housing project. Can you speak a little bit about some of your work, say in the Bronx or maybe in Atlanta now, about something similar?
Sure enough, folks, I farm upstate, but I still live in the Bronx, the boogie down Bronx. And that's where I got my activism. And that's where I started to look at the social issues, because in that community garden, it wasn't about just focusing on growing food. When I started to hear the social issues that were impacting my community. Right then and there, I knew how food was intersecting so many things. For example, I'm in the garden and you're hearing, wait a second, these are the same people that are growing food but can't afford rent. There's no affordable housing. They're in the garden, they're talking about economics, unemployment, low wages. They're in the garden, they're talking about health problems, type 2 diabetes, hypertension. They're in the garden talking about environmental problems, asthma. So there is this intersection. Food alone, food cannot stand alone, especially in poor urban and rural areas when it intersects so many different things. And as a result, you must connect with so many different groups. So, for instance, in our community gardens, when we were trying to fight Giuliani, when he tried to auction off those 100 community gardens, we went to the housing groups, the nonprofit housing groups that understood that it's not only about affordable housing, but it's about affordable food. We went to the environmental groups to help us because it's not about growing food, it's about working with asthma and the environment. We went to in our garden, we went to the labor unions because they knew it was not about just eating food, but the ability to afford to buy food. And so we can't have people divide us, especially when you're in a low income neighborhood and you're surrounded by so many social issues that interconnect one another. How do you bring those groups together holistically to move the food system and into something that people time and time and say is broken? No, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's a caste system based on race and demographics and economics. How do we move it in such a way that we change it? And that change comes with a shift of power, and the power lies in the hands of the community. And together with labor, with people working on housing, people working on the environment together, this is how we're going to move this society in a way that is healing, that is healthy, and that is just for all.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Hallelujah again. Amen. Amen. We're getting all kinds of
I
great.
can't see a thing, but I hope so. But wait, I want to take this last few seconds,
Yes,
Jim,
sure.
because I told you from the very beginning, I want to spend a little time to talk about where you are now, and your journey.
Oh, absolutely. Real quickly, we got just a few minutes. I live here in Richmond, Kentucky, on a farm that goes back in our family to 1880. It's on the land that was inhabited for 30,000 years or so by the Cherokee and Shawnee people. And we go back, a long time on this farm right here in our family. And, my great great grandparents came out of enslavement, bought the land in 1880, and they were part of they were both school teachers in the black schools here. They were part of the Black Farmer Cooperative. They were doing things, nationally. They brought the likes in 1919 here in Richmond, a small town. They brought W.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, and George Washington Carver to here in Richmond. So we have a strong family cultural legacy of people who were what I call agrarian, intellectual activists. And I'm just blessed to be able to be on this land that has such legacy and just ancestral spirit woven all through it, and to be able to keep that work moving. We do a variety of things. Again, my cousin next door has an annual women's retreat. And borrowing from my work I did for many years with Baba Will Allen and Mama Erica Allen and other people within Growing Power, we would hold, as you remember, our gatherings around the full moon. Because again, as we're trying to reclaim this memory of this sacredness with all that's around us, we have to unlearn some things and create new forms of rituals and how we even hold a seed summit. So we would hold our gathering on the full moon weekend in October. Why? Because again, it was important for us to allow the women who were part of the gathering to go out and do that evening what's called the grandmother moon ceremony, to make those kind of connections. So we're doing that here on our farm again with our annual women's retreats. We do retreats a lot. People visit here a lot. We're part of a Kentucky network. It's called Black Soil, Our Better Nature, and that particular network is to connect what I call black soil with black souls, connecting, all people, but in particular connecting African Americans in an urban setting with our rural black farmers. And we do a whole host of things, farm tours, farm dinners, and other kinds of networking going on within that program called Black Soil. That's just part of the wonderful work that, again, like what I'm doing, what I'm doing is a continuation of what's been going before me, and we stand, as we say, on the shoulders of our ancestors. We've been, guided, we've been called. It's just what, for me, I don't know any better. Okay, I don't know any better.
And we're still learning.
Yes, every day, every day, every day. And I would just say, if we're still on, I have this little. I'll take this. When I go and I do presentations, I take with me seeds, shells, sage, and different kind of things to bring the spirit. This is I got this in I think Trinidad. It's like a wood sculpture of a maroon who is blowing a shell, also with a machete on and a chain. So we're all still in this situation right here. We're all fighting like hell. We're resisting the onslaught, the devastation. We still have to fight. Okay, we're all still chained in a lot of ways. We've got to find ways to unchain ourselves, but we're also responsible for calling back to the ancestors of the past, calling those in the present, and calling the future. And that's our work.
Jim, it's been a pleasure. And I think our time is up. So, yeah, what a joy.
Thank you so much to both of you, Mama Carrot and Jim. You guys have been really amazing. Thank you for setting this Sunday sermon. It's I can't think of a better way to spend my Sunday afternoon. So thank you. This is when I wish we could all enjoy some food together and sing some songs.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.